Hey guys, my name is Moon and welcome to my Let's Play of Witch on the Holy Night. So this game is a visual novel from Kinoko Nazu and Type Moon. So he is best known for his works on The Garden of Sinners, Tsukihime, and the FATED Night series or Fate series in general, I guess. So I don't know anything about this game, but I do know that this is a prequel to Tsukihime, and I don't know anything about Tsukihime either. I just know the name. So pretty much I'm gonna be going in to this visual novel with, I guess, zero knowledge, right? Except for the Fate series. I've watched some animes on the Fate series. I reacted to it on the channel as well. So if you want to check it out, you can do it. So I'm pretty much gonna go blind on this one, but I'm pretty excited because yes, Fate series was awesome, so this probably is gonna be good as well, right? So yeah, I made a poll on my channel like a couple months ago, so this one came in second actually, but I'm gonna be playing this one and the Fate Stay Night remastered in concurrent of each other, even though this was a second one, so we can have both series in the channel at the same time, right? So that's gonna be pretty cool. So yeah, without further ado, let's just start this. Here we go. So by the way, there is a problem with the Steam version, at least on my end. I have an AMD GPU and it does not like to play with this game for some reason. So there's gonna be, I guess, like this, some graphical bugs like this. It's just very, very minor. But if it gets major as we go through the story, I think I'm just gonna go and play it on a different system. We'll just have to see. But if it's just like this, I guess we can bear with it, right? We'll see. So here we go. It was a winter's day 8 years ago. That solemn morning when she understood the value of life for the very first time. Her home was nestled on the side of a mountain. Around it was nothing but inhospitable wilderness. She had no neighbors or childhood friends to speak of. Things like traveling to school or playing outside were more trouble than they ought to be. Indeed, with its pure water and bright stars, it was a place rich with memories, both frustrating and halcyon. That was only during summer though. Winters on those mountains were extremely frigid, each morning more severe than the last. Her father would drive her to the station after waiting 10 minutes for the engine to warm up and the ice over windows to clear. Her father would savor his morning coffee, leaving her to venture outside and rev the engine. Out the front door, she would go traversing the garden with icy breath until she reached that old sedan. As always, she inserted the key, then started the ignition. The engine rumbled to life. Just as she proudly finished that humble task she'd done so many times before, a shrill scream pierced the air. She knew, even though it wasn't human, that the feeble sound was a cry of agony. A few moments passed. Her father came out and opened the hood of the car. Is there a cat in there? Creaking fan belts, a monstrous looking engine, and something that didn't belong. There was a cat, a mother by the looks of it, and her 2 kittens. Yes, if you live, I guess, in a very cold place, always check the trunk of your car. Because sometimes, yeah, cats, maybe guess rats, raccoons, I suppose, they would be inside the car because yeah, it's hot and warm, and if you open your car, it's brutal. The three cats had been huddling for warmth in the engine's compartment. The mother cat was missing its head. One of the kittens had been mangled beyond recognition by the engine belts and surely died instantly. The other kitten, its face half covered in blood, panted faintly. It desperately clung to its mother, or rather the chunk of meat that had been its mother, with the last bit of life it could muster. We just started this game and it's very gruesome already. Okay.
かわいそうに。
Her father lamented their plight. The previous night had been especially cold. After he had returned home yesterday, the cats must have snuck under the hood, drawn by the warmth of the engine. They had slept next to the engine and awoken to a storm of spinning belts. Cars in the 80s were not sealed particularly well, so this was not unheard of.
いいんだ。が悪いんじゃないんだよ。
Her father's voice seemed distant. She could only make out a small tuft of the kitten's gray fur. The rest of it was caked in blood of its mother and brother. I can see its skull, the fragile life of a speckled kitten. Trembling and possibly blind, it continued to nuzzle against its dead mother's chest.
待ちなさい。
She took the kitten into her arms and ran deep into the mountains to her grandfather's house. Was it because she was overcome with regret? Or was it the shock of grief? Years later, she still wasn't sure. Fighting back the welling tears, she burst into her grandfather's workshop. Her grandfather was a magician who could do anything. She had never seen magic. She knew that magic was a fantasy straight out of fairy tales, but so was her grandfather. She had to find him. He was the only one who could help.
その子猫の運命を変えろという。
The cave-dwelling magician said indifferently. This kitten needs our help, she pleaded. Whether it was a simple task or a Herculean labor, her grandfather would not say. He simply granted the girl's childish wish like a machine. The girl said. Before she knew it, however, she was holding a tiny corpse in her hands. Its fur was cold. The warmth of life had left its body, and the tears she had fought so hard to hold back poured from her eyes. Regret spread through her chest like an endless gray sky.
トロだったな。結局元に戻すとは。
Her mind struggled to come to grips with what had just occurred. The last 10 minutes were a total blank. Who she met, what she had known, it was all if it had never happened. Let me turn on the voice volume a little bit more. I guess 2 more? Yeah, like that. The only thing she was sure of was that life, once extinguished, can never return.
そこに誰かいるの?
That day, it was her mistake that gave birth to me. Indeed, whatever occurred that day, it was a day of nostalgia and longing. This is the fairy tale of 8 years ago. The day they first met, no magic can ever bring back. Arrogant, greedy, and able only to destroy, I must be a wolf. I don't have regrets. There's no looking back. If my pride has left you behind, my sincere condolences. But at any rate, I suppose it's my fate to die at the hands of Little Red Riding Hood. Number 1, Strange One. Very sad opening to this game. It was a quiet morning. From her bed, she could see the sky was an ashen watercolor gray. The thermometer displayed 43 degrees Fahrenheit, a rather unforgiving temperature for November. Her stomach woke her up with a growl, pathetically reminding her that she had completely missed breakfast. But lazy mornings like today's were, for her, a blessing. It was already well past 8 in the morning. On any ordinary weekday, tardiness would be unavoidable, but today's classes were cancelled in commemoration of the school's anniversary. Gratefully, she had every intention of taking it easy for the first time in ages. Outside the window was a gloomy gray, and it reminded her more of evening than morning. It wasn't a pleasant morning by any stretch of the imagination, but having been up all night just 3 hours ago, she couldn't care less about the weather outside. All she cared about was more sleep. As long as she could spend her morning in bed, what was happening outside was no concern to her. She shut the curtains, then closed her eyes and tried to let sleep reclaim her.
せめてあと2時間ぐらいは凡庸な夢を見ていられますように。
Blissful slumber found her soon enough. Her consciousness faded. However, her simple request would be mercilessly refused because someone was calling. A faint but shrill sound lingered in her ears. It was the unmistakable ring of a telephone. Much to her chagrin, her eyes popped open out of a habit.
こんな日に限って。
The telephone was situated in the foyer on the first floor. Answering it meant walking down a 30-foot corridor and going down a flight of stairs. In her sleep-deprived state, the distance seemed somewhere between incredibly far and astronomically far. The phone's incessant ringing continued. She knew the caller would eventually give up if she ignored it, but she chose to fight the urge.
アリス出ないの？
She thought her housemate would get it, but she soon had to abandon all hope. The realization struck that their housemate did not have the day off from school and was likely in class at her prestigious little hilltop academy. The caller proved incredibly persistent. Honestly, the backgrounds in this game is beautiful. That persistence made the volume of the ringing seem even louder.
もうせっかくの安眠を。
She was left with no choice but to get up, throw a top on, and leave the room.
寒。
She rubbed her hands together to warm her numb fingers. The mansion's heating system was inadequate, to say the least, which meant that winter was the very worst of uninvited guests. Never more so than on a dreary morning as this, when one didn't need to use a thermometer to know how cold it was. The mansion sat in the mountains and was surrounded by dense forest. Winter always arrived here first, before moving on to nearby towns. The robotic ring of the telephone reverberated throughout the long hallway. The mansion's furnishing had been so perfectly maintained that it made the place unlived or feel unlived. It seemed lonelier than it did splendid. Coupled with the dreary morning, it could have passed for a haunted house.
ま、幽霊屋敷そのものだけど、だいたい2人で住むには広すぎるのよ、この家は。
She counted more than 30 rings since it first began. The caller either had a lot of free time on her hands or had a good understanding of the house's circumstances. She had a strong hunch that it was the latter. The window above looked out onto a gloomy sky. She hastened to catch the underlanding ring in the act as soon as possible, though she had a feeling that her happy morning might come to a close the moment she caught it. It was here that a series of incidents began. Apologies for the lack of romance to this tale, for whether it be objectively true or merely supposition, it is always from gloomy and unassuming beginnings that extraordinary events are set into motion. The rain had subsided somewhat by the time she reached the school gate. Sunlight seemed to be playing a peekaboo behind the clouds in the distance. It looked like it might be cleared up by early afternoon.
と言っても、私には関係のない話だけど。
The weather reflected her luck. On top of being forced out of the house at such an early hour, she had to suffer through a winter rain. I am getting a bad feeling about this. The sinking feeling she had only grew as she passed through the entrance and headed inside. She didn't encounter any other students along the way, nor did she see anyone taking part in club activities either. The reception desk to the faculty room simply read "faculty closed." The school had given all of its students the day off, except those explicitly summoned like her, a fact that irked her more and more as the minutes passed. She opened the door to the faculty room and headed towards the desk she had visited a number of times before. The man at the desk wore a plain shirt and suit that were nonetheless neatly pressed. Slim framed glasses adorned his face, giving off an amicable yet cunning air. The mild-mannered image this mid-twenties man presented clashed with the cigarette he smoked. He didn't appear to have noticed her yet.
Yamashiro-sensei.
She closed the door with a bang. Showing no response to the sudden sound, Mr. Yamashiro lifted his head.
やあ、おはよう、青崎くん。要件は聞いているかな?
Okay, we got our new character.
はい。1時間前に自宅で、事前に何の相談もなく。
Having graduated from this high school himself, Mr. Yamashiro was not much older than the rest of the students. For that reason, the students preferred him over the other teachers. He always had something interesting to talk about and kept conversations casual. In fact, he seemed more like an older student than a teacher, but she unfortunately didn't share her fellow students' fondness for him. She was of the opinion that teachers should come across as more austere, like an iron fist that could inspire both love and hate in equal measure, not a buddy to joke and pal around with. So if you had a teacher, would you like your teacher to be strict, or a teacher, yeah, you can joke around with, just like what she's saying here? For me personally, I think it's much better if you can joke with the teacher, but there's gotta be boundaries, I guess, right? If you're the teacher yourself, yeah, there gotta be boundaries there that should be respected still, even though you're joking around and doing stuff like that, right? He was the exact opposite of how she felt a teacher should be. It was only natural that her manner towards him would be forced and unfriendly. Not that she'd ever been wired to make friendly small talk.
はあ、今日もご機嫌斜めみたいだね、君は。
それは先生の気のせいです。今日だけ特別という話ではありませんから。
The matter-of-fact answer perfectly matched the displeasure displayed, on her face. Her bad mood from having to get up early and the tiredness from staying up late must have collectively made her look positively adversarial.
そうならいいんだけどね。彼にはそう辛く当たらないでくれよ。僕らじゃ正直どう扱っていいかわからないところもあるし。
先生、その件ですけど、私まだ詳しい話を聞かされていないのですが。
As Mr. Yamashiro met her piercing eyes, he finally understood the reason behind her tone and slowly put out his cigarette.
電話じゃあなんて聞いたの？
転入生の紹介をするとだけです。理由も脈絡もない説明でした。
One of Mr. Yamashiro's eyebrows stood up, impressed with the brevity of her answer. He could see that she was angry, not because she had been called to school on her day off, but because she hadn't been told why she was here. Mr. Yamashiro chuckled sympathetically.
先生、これが笑い話ならそろそろ帰っていいでしょうか？
いや、ごめん謝るよ。冗談じゃなくて真面目な話なんだ。ちょっと君の手を借りたくてね。
本当に転入生の問題で？
訳ありというか難しいというか。彼宗十郎くんというんだけど、ちょっといろいろとずれていてね。僕らが案内してあげるより同世代の君の方が適任だと思ったんだ。
She threw him an unamused look. It was negligent of them to be pushing teaching studies or duties on her, but she did wonder how exactly this transfer student was peculiar. Maybe he meant the student had behavioral problems or was difficult somehow. But peculiar? She didn't have the slightest idea what that meant.
ずれてるなんてそう使わない表現だけど。
She had her doubts, but swept them aside for now. This wasn't the time to get distracted by more concerns. The fact remained that this conversation was all the peculiar she could handle, and she needed more information. She was already beginning to fantasize about saying no and curling up in her warm bed at home.
一つ質問があります。
何？あ、学年は君と同じ2年生だよ。性格は落ち着きがあって人の話をよく聞くタイプ。青崎くんとはクラスは違うけどきっと仲良くな。
そういったことは本人から直接聞きますし測ります。そうではなくなぜ私なんでしょうか？
So yeah, the new student is pretty much, I guess, a good guy, right? But why? Yeah, why her though? Though her tone was still stern, it was clear that she was willing to cooperate. She had decided to put her feelings of dissatisfaction aside and focus on the task at hand. Forcing herself to act empathetic in spite of her self-absorbed nature was something she was used to. Paradoxically, this force of will was also the reason teachers put so much faith in her. To a point, at times, that strength shattered expectation, and on those occasions, they were left with no choice but to treat it like a natural disaster and weather it until it passed. That was how Mr. Yamashiro had come to deal with her as over the past year.
もう一度だけ聞きます、山城先生。それでなぜ私なんでしょうか？
Pressured by a question without a clear yes or no answer, he answered.
それはね、別に青崎くんが先生方に敬遠されているのと同じぐらい信頼されていて、学校のためなら教師も生徒も一緒くたに切って捨てる鉄の生徒会長だからじゃないよ。
Oh, she is the student council president?
それ以外にこんな呼びつけを受ける理由はないと思いますけど。
Her eyes did nothing to hide her disbelief as she glared at him. Strength far beyond that of an ordinary 17-year-old girl, coupled with the youthful beauty of one. Mr. Yamashiro let slip a genuine smile, admiring the miraculous balance of qualities.
いや、責務だけでいいなら僕がやってるさ。この人選に関しちゃ教師や生徒会長といった役職も関係ないよ。なんていうか、こんな頼みを損得抜きで聞いてくれるのは君だけだと思ってね。適任ですからと強く推薦したわけ。
In other words, he knew she wouldn't say no.
山城先生。
うわ、怖っ。もう睨まない睨まない。言ったろ、僕にはともかく彼には笑顔でって。とまあ納得してくれたならすぐに移動しよう。もうずいぶん待たせてしまっているからね。それと雨の中ご苦労様。帰りはもちろん車で送るよ。
Mr. Yamashiro stood up gracefully. I'm good, thanks, she replied, before turning and walking out of the faculty room. He had been waiting for about an hour. While he did, the rain shower lightened into a drizzle. His mind wandered as he listened to the sound of the raindrops. The room was filled with neatly arranged rectangular tables. He was the only one there. Quite some time had passed since he had been brought to this room and asked to wait. Even the best behaved student might have grown dissatisfied or anxious with the situation by now, but the boy stuck to his spot, like a scarecrow. He was chilled to the bone. It was the end of November, and the low temperature in the morning had marked the start of winter. The room was not much warmer. The heater hadn't been turned on either. Either he'd missed the teacher telling him to turn it on, or he'd never seen one in his life. Me personally, I've never seen a heater. In a building, in a classroom. Because in my country, it is hot, so we don't need that. He breathed lightly on his freezing fingers as he aimlessly surveyed his surroundings. This dreary place was apparently a meeting room. The other students might have considered it a wonderful place to meet, but to him it was a drab and overly spacious. It was a lifeless place that reminded him of an arid cave. Stuck in this cold room with absolutely nothing to do, his mind turned to what they wanted to discuss. Unable to come up with a solid answer, he returned his attention to the sound of rain. The rain hardly resembled the rain in the mountains, though he could still recognize it barely. Its smell and sound were harsher, but at the end of the day, rain was still rain. So even this world, alien as it was, could have something in common with the mountains. The trivial detail perked him up a little. He liked how the town looked soaked in rain. Naturally, he preferred sunny weather, but he liked the rain in its own way. The fog from the rain had soaked up the scent of the soil and it reminded him of home. It was at times like these that he was able to numb the anxiety the city gave him. But then he let out a discouraged sigh. How pathetic. He'd already been here 2 weeks and thoughts of his town, or his hometown, still made him sad. Perhaps feeling that he was being unfair to his new life, he composed himself and continued to wait patiently. As if having a passion for distraction, his attention returned to the sound of rain once more. Waiting like this didn't seem to be particularly hard for him. He quietly endured the numbing cold and the hour alone with a calm, deep breath. As the saying goes, good things come to those who wait. A strong point of his or not, he was astonishingly patient. It was certainly helping him out in this moment. She, on the other hand, was livid. The profile of the transfer student had been explained to her on her way to the meeting room. She was told he had lived his whole life up in the mountains without any electricity. That meant more than half of civilized society would have been an utter mystery to him.
なんて絶望的な断絶。戦後どころか戦前の話じゃない。ロビンソンにも程がある。
Robinson Crusoe? Who's that? She had every right to be angry. His village had apparently remained isolated in the mountains for many years. Contact with villages in the foothills of the mountains only occurred once a month or so, which was unfathomable in modern Japan. Although expressways and Japan Rail, the old national railways now, spanned the country like arteries, it wasn't entirely impossible for mountain villages like this to exist. But she couldn't imagine how someone born to such circumstances.
電気がないって、村に行き渡っていないだけで公衆電話ぐらいはあったんですよね。
なかったそうだよ。こっちに暮らすようになってまず驚いたのが電話だそうだし。電話って便利ですねなんて真顔で言われてね、そういえばそうだなぁと再確認させられたぐらいだよ。
She shot a sidelong glare his way as he laughed. It seemed that the naivety of the country boy had cheered up Mr. Yamashiro a bit.
駐在もいないってことか。うちも実家は山奥ですから、電気が通っていないのはありえないとは言いませんけど。そいつ、学校も知らないんですか？
うん。どんなものかは知っていたそうだけど、実際来るのは今日が初めてらしい。それで緊張していたのかな。あまり会話も弾まなかった。ああいうのも野生児っていうのかな。狼に育てられた狼少年みたいな。あ、いや、探検隊の話だね。怖いな青崎くん。冗談だって。そう睨まないでくれ。大丈夫。話してみた感じおとなしい子だったから。なんていうか言葉の通じない小動物みたいな感じ。
山城先生、その例え気休めになってませんから。
As she gave her blunt reply, she tried to simulate in her mind what life without electricity would be like, but the thought of it took her sour mood from bad to worse. After all, it was a world that she had never known. She could understand why the teachers had given up. She too wanted to give up and return to her warm bed, but her good-for-nothing pride was holding her hostage. Not only did the teachers believe she was up to the task, but she also believed that she could do it. It wasn't easy to go back on her word, no matter how bad things looked after the fact. She walked along the hallway, the rain pattering in the background. The meeting room was already in sight. With a furrowed brow, she fixed her long hair in anticipation of meeting the unknown stranger within. Her elegant strides were like those of a confident general going into battle.
いや、青崎くん、君を信頼してる僕だけど、念のため確認しておくよ。なんていうか、優しくね。できれば笑顔とか作れないかな。
She is definitely not gonna smile at him for sure.
作り笑いは苦手です。一応努力しているつもりですが。
Look at this, I'm bad at faking smiles.
ああ、そうなんだ。それはよかった。いやー、ほんとよかった。青崎くんにも苦手なものってあったんだね。
Mr. Yamasiro's shoulders slumped the second they reached the meeting room. As he put his hand to the door, his eyes seemed to say to her, "Be nice, please." This only made her more irritated.
わかってるわよ。愛想が悪いってのは。でも笑顔なんて意識して作るものじゃないんだし。だいたいそういうインスタントな人付き合いなら飛び丸の方が向いてるっての。
Tobimaru. She sighed. Yeah, Tobimaru isn't the second Hokage. She sighed about her social shortcomings, but it occurred to her that being called into school on a day off while sleep deprived wasn't anything to smile about anyway. She also thought that the person responsible for this mess would be better off attending elementary school. It might not be his fault, but neither was it her duty or obligation to do the teacher's work for them. At the very least, they could have used their brains and organized all of this on a normal school day, another complaint she wanted to voice later.
いや、というか敵。なんであろうと敵。悪いけど、情状酌量以前に敵。間が悪いのはお互い様っていうか、ほんと、なんでよりにもよってこんな忙しい時に。
Her pounding headache from a lack of sleep had boosted her aggression by 10%. No matter how harmless the guy on the other side of the door may be, anyone who disturbed her sleep was the enemy. And just as she was reaching peak annoyance, Mr. Yamasiro opened the door to the meeting room. The room slowly slid into view. She didn't care for formalities, just looked straight ahead and stormed into the room, and found herself face to face with a most unusual opponent. Before we go on, let's see from another perspective. Turning back the clock just a little. You don't have to do anything. For some, these words are a priceless luxury. For others, they are unbearable torture. For the proactive girl, it was definitely the former, though she'd be too suspicious of the motives of anyone giving her such a gift to accept it. For the passive boy, it was definitely the latter, a bitter thorn that made him homesick. Though at this very moment his mind was so distracted with the wait for his face to reveal any discontent. He maintained the perfect composure as he stared at the gray sky. He had already waited a whole hour, but figured they must have had their reasons for making him wait. And as long as she had the sound of rain to suit him, he could keep on waiting.
でも、そろそろ9時を過ぎるのか。どうなんだろ
He had been vaguely keeping track of the time as he listened to the rain. Due to the holiday, the school building was completely silent, except for the patter of the rain on the window. The mood felt as damp as the air. It was then he heard the heavy clatter of footsteps approaching.
よかった。忘れられているかと思った。
He could hear two sets of footsteps, one heavier set belonging to an adult. He breathed a sigh of relief as the door slid open.
すまないね。ずいぶんとお待たせしちゃって。
The first person he saw was a man wearing glasses and an awkward smile. That's Mr. Yamashiro, the one who brought me here.
ってあれ里中先生いないんですか？
Mr. Yamashiro scratched his head, looking increasingly apologetic. And then from behind him, with a tight-lipped expression that made it clear she didn't want to be there, a dark-haired girl with a determined look in her eyes appeared. Sojiro gulped. The sound of the rain on the window faded into nothingness. That's when he knew. This was how it felt when time stood still. She blinked quickly a few times as if taken aback. Why was anyone's guess? Her eyes are so blue, look at it. The boy was everything she expected a naive country boy to look like. However, she felt something she couldn't understand. His eyes widened slightly as if taken aback. The reason was obvious. Putting his feelings into words was a different matter altogether, so we will never know exactly what that experience in that moment, or what he experienced, I mean. Is it like love? That's when it hit him. He sensed he'd been touched by the hands of destiny.
紹介するよ。彼が転入生の静木宗十郎くん。で、こっちの彼女が静木くんの案内役。うちの生徒会長で休日を押して新しい仲間の案内役を買って出てくれた青崎青子くんだ。
His voice and the sound of rain seemed distant. This is how they first met. Such was their start, for better or worse, like the ephemeral beauty. It was commonly believed among students that Ayoko was always in a foul mood. But this gossip was 90% prejudice, as Ayoko simply didn't have the time to be irritated 24/7. The reality when she simply didn't want to explain herself all the time, and therefore seemed angry about something obvious or not. This idle gossip did, however, lead to her earning the title of one of the 7 deadly threats. 7 deadly threats. The remaining 10% of the gossip was right on the mark. Aoko herself often had the feeling that her tendency to feel animosity towards harmless things was akin to what a chronic headache sufferer might experience. Today fell under that 10%. For today, her anger was pure, and her childish and selfish display was befitting of her actual age. The meeting room was dimly lit, awash in the colors of the rain. To reduce electricity costs, school regulations forbid the use of lights during the day. This was the setting the three of them found themselves in. Her first impression was that his calm demeanor reminded her of a field of wildflowers. Why does it look like he's injured though, right? Like he's bandaged in the neck, you see that? In spite of his perfect posture, his overall air felt placid, sane even. And though describing him as meek would be going too far, at the very least, he was passive. Even through his uniform, she could see that he was thinner than average. His dark hair was unkempt, and he came across as a wholly unforgettable boy. If she had to look at him in a more positive light, she would describe him more than a young man. It was his calm demeanor that made him seem more mature. Look at that face. Was that the cause of Aoko's reasonless reaction? He seemed almost too at home in the meeting room, and then she was left with the impression that it was her and the teacher, not this outsider, who were the guests here. She felt an unidentifiable aggravation building within her, almost as if her right to be here was in question. She's always angry, I guess. Aoko felt herself raising her natural defenses.
信じられない。私、今わけもなく怒ってない。
Is she gonna be like this the whole game? She hated not understanding things, her own emotions in particular. It pained her less than you would imagine for a perfectionist like her, but it still nagged her like a thorn in her side.
いやーほら青崎くん挨拶してあげなくちゃ。
Mr. Yamasiro's attempt to relieve the tension was equally irritating.
挨拶。
After casting a nasty glance in a teacher's direction, Aoko turned to face the boy. She's like, I don't want to be here anymore. From an outsider's perspective, it might have looked like a stare down. And in that instant, the culmination of her emotional state hurled toward the innocent boy and skewered him.
いや待たせたねしずきくん。
Hearing his name, Sojiro came to his senses. Kinda hard to remember the name. Shizuki Sojiro. I mean the spelling, like Sojiro. You can spell it Sojiro, right? But Sojiro. His stunned gaze shook loose. He took a deep breath to clear his head. Chalking it up to nerves, Mr. Yamashiro broke out a smile and turned to the girl standing beside him.
紹介するよ。彼が転入生のしずき宗十郎くん。
Okay, full name Sojiro Shizuki. Can you not name him Suzuki?
で、こっちの彼女がしずきくんの案内役。うちの生徒会長で休日を押して新しい仲間の案内役を買って出てくれた青崎青子くんだ。
Aoko Aozaki. Having been introduced by Mr. Yamashiro, the girl took a step forward. Her eyes were merciless, her stare an unspoken threat to violently trample her opponent. Sojiro, on the other hand, managed to keep his own composure despite the shock at how confrontational she appeared. He had never been greeted quite like this before, but supposed mistakenly that this was how people treated each other in the city. The exchange must have looked quite dramatic to an onlooker. A girl ready to brawl, an earnest country boy desperate to understand. It was a murderous limbo for anyone in the room with them. Like Mr. Yamashiro, for example. While he had thought he had made the right decision in choosing an honor student to help him out, she was in an inexplicably bad mood and the tension in the air was undeniable. It was at this moment that he realized his failure. His realization had come far too late. One false move and this girl, whom no problem was too large, would becoming a storm that would rock the very foundations of the school. Just as the almighty Joker card bring either fortune or disaster, the sole teacher who had been present at the time would come to bear the blame for the scandal that ensued. What, are they gonna actually fight?
いけてる。二人とも気は合うようだね。それじゃあ僕はこの辺でいいかな。
Mr. Yamashiro laughed nervously as he crept toward the door.
僕は職員室にいるから終わったら来るように。いいかい、青崎くん。くれぐれもだぜ。なんていうか、生徒会長としての度量の広さをこの際僕に信じさせてほしいかな。
Mr. Yamashiro left, leaving the two in a locked-eyed state, one in which one set of eyes was doing all the glaring. All that remained in the room was an artless boy and a crossed-arm guarded girl. The two lingered in silence. They resembled shogi players agonizing over their first moves, though it was only Ayoko who was reading as much into the situation. She decided to put her irritation aside for the time being. With no reason to feel revulsion for him in the first place, she sighed deeply and faced Shojuro.
まあいいわ。山城先生がヒルアンドンなのは今に始まったことじゃないし。それで、あなた名前は？
Her tone was nothing if not reproachful, though he had done nothing to offend her. But the boy failed to pick up on it. Incapable of such venom himself, like they're very opposite, I guess, in the personality department, right? He's very calm. I mean, she is very calm as well, but she's like angry all the time, I guess, right?
ああ、静木宗十郎かな。君は青崎さんだったね。
For whatever reason, he came across as happy in his response.
さんはいいわ。柄じゃないから。こっちは静木くんでいい？
いいって何が？
Yeah, I actually need to write down the name so I don't forget. It's kind of new to me, like Shizuki, Sojuro.
だから呼び方。くんづけでいいかって聞いてるの。何よ。おかしなこと言った？私。
いや、すごく。
The boy replied immediately, as if it was a natural response, but quickly second-guessed himself.
いや、いいんだ。ごく一般的なんだろう。静木くんで頼む。君は青崎でいいんだよな。
よろしく。
She followed her blunt reply with a swift turn away from him. While she was hardly thrilled at the prospect of the task at hand, it had been entrusted to her and it was her personal policy to see it through the end.
悪いけど、優しくしてあげる気はないから。時間も惜しいし、手早く行くわよ。
それは助かる。やっぱり時間は大切だ。
Ayoko's blunt rancor was lost on him once again. Humans tend to be overly conscious about being ignored, whatever the form that takes. But despite being peeved at landing none of her attacks, Ayoko did her best to act professional and directed her guest to the hallway. There was no sunlight in the hallway, nor any sign of life. This was more like a prison than the cave that was the meeting room. As it dawned on Ayoko that the hallway matched her mood, she sighed once again.
まず聞いておくけど、山城先生から聞いたことは理解してる？
ああ、学校の仕組みについては分かった。この建物全部に同い年の人間がいるなんてちょっと想像できないけど。
そう、よかったわね。
Ayoko rubbed her forehead. This soldier kid had no idea what he was in for. Apparently, all he'd heard about school was that it was a place where a lot of people met to study. High school teachers imparted to students their knowledge in various fields of study while fostering discipline and creativity. But never did Ayoko imagine that she would have to explain the concept of school itself to someone. It was, yes, fundamentals were important, but this was absurd. She had serious doubts whether he could even handle classes, but Mr. Yamashiro insisted that things would work out somehow. Sojiro had managed to pass the transfer exam after all, but barely.
ま、私には関係ないけど。
Ayoko grumbled mentally as she walked down the hallway. She consoled herself with the fact that today would be the only day she'd spend with this boy out of time, or at least she'd try to keep it that way.
青崎、
He asked calmly, trying to get her attention.
何？
こっちも一つ聞いていいかな。
だから何？
俺の気のせいだと思うんだが、君はまるで何かを睨んでいるように見える。
She's just gonna be annoyed with that question.
やはり今朝は悪いものでも。
His gaze revealed earnest concern, as if asking her if she'd remembered to eat breakfast. What was that? What was that face? It was like another hammer to her head. It was true that Ayoko had been glaring at Sojiro the entire time. Glaring red hat daggers, in fact. Not just at him, but the universe. Even on her best days, her roommate used to remark.
青子の視線は普通の人には厳しいわ。もう少し多くのことに寛大になるべきね。
She'd been warned that her emotions were so naked on her face that people could not pick up on this.
私をバカにしてるってわけじゃなさそうよね、この場合。
Even she found her attempt to reassure herself unconvincing. It began to dawn on Ayoko far too late that compared to her, this laid-back transfer student might as well have been from another planet.
いいわ。言葉にしないとわからないようだから言うけど、まるでじゃなくてズバリそうなの。あなたの気のせいじゃなくて、私は視線で遠回しに感情を表現してたの。いちいち声に出すのも会話にするのも面倒だから。
In response to her words, the Martian clapped his hands together.
なるほど。どうしてそうしたいのかはわからないが、確かにそっちの方が手っ取り早い意思表現だ。
Sojiro accepted her reasoning without argument, though he still had no idea what kinds of emotions she was trying to express. It was as if she could hear the voice or the words didn't grasp the meaning. Ideas that should have connected were instead separated into blocks.
確かにずれてるわ、こいつ。
Mr. Yamasiro's words made sense to her now. What was odd about this boy went way beyond naivety. A stranger in a strange land he may be, but it was only civilized to forgive him some jet-lag-induced confusion.
じゃ、とりあえずあなたの教室に行くから。
She had regained her composure. Sojiro raised his hand and stopped in his tracks.
あと一つ。
Ayoko waited for Sojiro to continue. The boy was patient to a fault. She rubbed her forehead with her hand again, nursing a vague feeling of uneasiness.
これもちょっとした疑問なんだが、なんで君は怒ってるんだ？怒るのが商売とか、そういう家柄の人なのか？
Okay. A long silence. Though she knew it wouldn't change the situation, she remembered her regret at answering the phone that morning. Honestly, these two, like it's gonna be a start of a very nice friendship, right? He meant no harm. She repeated this thought like a mantra in an attempt to keep her impulses in check.
別にあなたのせいじゃないから気にする必要はないわ。ただ、この一瞬とお昼まで眠っていた場合を計りにかけたら、あまりに利益の違いがあって頭を抱えただけよ。
With that vague answer, she started to walk again and turned her gaze away from this rude stranger named Sojiro Shizuki. While what constitutes normal is certainly up for debate, most would undoubtedly refer to him as so. He was simple and a nice boy with nondescript features. If he were an ice cream flavor, he would be vanilla, so basically very plain. And Sojiro found Ayoko to be very businesslike and full of life. There was a certain purpose to her movements as they began and ended in an orderly fashion. The way her finger raised when she pointed at things. The way she made her way across the hallways and classrooms. The way she would occasionally glance back at him to make sure he was keeping pace. Each and every movement was so impressive that he couldn't take his eyes off her. Ayoko showed him to his homeroom, Class C of the 11th grade. The room certainly displayed more of a human touch than the previous meeting room, but Sojiro was none the wiser as to its function. Ayoko gave a brief explanation before they visited individual subject classrooms, as well as the gym, cafeteria, locker room, and school infirmary. Sojiro asked so many questions that much time has passed before they reached the AV room on the second floor.
まずいな。
Sojiro stopped, looking genuinely concerned.
あと20分経つと1時だ。
嘘でしょ？うちの校舎そんな広くないわよ。
The tour had begun around 10, which meant that 3 hours had passed. But she's been touring him for 3 hours now? Like, how big is this school? The tour of a school shouldn't take anywhere near this long, true.
そうだったわね。行く先々で根掘り葉掘り聞かれちゃ、そりゃ何時間でも経つわ。
Like, I remember, transferring schools, the only tour I got is just they showed me where the classroom is, and that was it. Yeah. Nothing else. Like, took like less than 5 minutes. Ayoko glared at Sojiro. She was being sarcastic, of course, knowing the full well he would never pick up on it. To her surprise, he looked down apologetically, unable to hide his dejection.
なんだこいつ。ちゃんとしてるっちゃ。
The guy before her now was nothing like earlier. In contrast to seeing his once impenetrable veneer when they first met, she found herself feeling sympathetic. Momentarily at least, until her irritation returned in full force.
で、何がまずいの？覚えることが多すぎてパンクしたなんて言わないでね。
いや、それもあるけど、学校のことは別にして1時になるとまずいんだ。
Sojuro's gaze wandered as if worried about something. If he was worried about the weather, he would have a hard time seeing it as if there were no windows in this hallway.
へえ、時間を気にするってことは用事があるのね。そう。人の予定を引っかき回しておいて、自分だけ好きなようにやろうって言うんだ。なんだ、顔に似合わずいい人ね、君。
いや、褒めても何も出ないぞ。
誰も褒めちゃいないわよ。
She yelled at him, unable to hold back her fury.
で？
それで一体何の用なの？
Sojuro's face lit up as he finally understood what she was asking him.
そこは秘密にしておきたい。
He said it with a perfectly straight face.
慣れ始めたつもりだったけど、こいつのこういったテンポには失神しそうになるわ。
Her frustration was natural. Still, she did everything she could to stifle her feelings and fake a smile.
しずきくん？
Okay, now she's being very good to him. She took a step forward.
秘密だってば。
Feeling the mood change drastically, Sojuro took a step back. And another and another. No matter how many steps he took back, she kept edging toward him. She was smiling, but thought he could see the blood boiling beneath her skin.
これ最後の質問にしとくわね。あなた、私をからかって楽しい？
He had no intentions of mocking her, though at this point he doubted presenting any evidence to prove this would do much to erase that forced smile on her face.
わかった。説明する。
His arms raised in surrender. She halted her advance and freed her face from that unseemly smile.
実は1時からアルバイトがあるんだ。でもここはそういうの禁止なんだろ？
そうだけど、あ、禁止されてるから秘密にしようと思ったの？バカね。それなら許可さえ下りていれば問題ないわよ。
知ってる。試験の時に許可をもらってる。
へえ。
Ayoko's face lit up as she realized he might not be the piece of work she thought him to be. Yet,
しかし許可は一つしかもらえなかった。
一つって、あなた掛け持ちでバイトしてるの？
これでも2件減らしたんだ。生活費だけで大変なのに学費まで稼がなくちゃいけない。なのに働き先は一つだけというのはあんまりだと思わないか？
いや、あんまりなのはあなたの方だと思うけど。
though still irritated, her opinion of him changed a little. She was impressed that he was able to take care of this tuition and living expenses all on his own. She could also empathize with having no time to oneself, Her anger began to subside. The words a part-time job were about the last thing she ever expected to hear out of this country boy's mouth.
そういうことなら仕方ないわね。いいわ、行きなさいよ。事情は分かったから。
青崎はいいのか？
She had no idea what his question meant, but she at least understood he was trying to be considerate, which also took her by surprise. She figured he'd be just as dense about people's feelings as he was about everything else.
別に。私もこのまま帰るから。
Look at her face though. Look at that. First, though, she thought it best that they both stop by the faculty room. Mr. Yamasuro had mentioned that the transfer procedures had already been completed, so all that remained was for him to sign off on her duties.
先生、案内終わりました。
それはお疲れ様。しずきくんもお疲れ様。それで校舎を回った感想はどうかな？
ありがとうございます。なんというか、とても学校ですね。
I mean, because it is a real school.
そうかそうか。うん、明日から頑張りなさい。
She had no interest whatsoever in this pointless wrap-up meeting.
山城先生のことは気にしないでいいわ。教え子に厄介なことを押し付けてふんぞり返っているぐらい職員室が好きなんだから、何時間でも待ってるでしょ。いえ、待ってるべきじゃない？
そうか。青崎がいいんならいいんだな。
I like how what do you call this? The necktie and the ribbon are different, right? For girls, I guess it's red, and for the boys, it's blue. There it was again. Whatever Sojiro was getting at, Ayoko had no choice, or no idea, I mean.
それじゃ行くよ。今日はありがとう。
今日だけよ、今日だけ。
She shooed him away with her hand. His face bent into a broad smile as he found the gesture endearing. It was a softer expression than she had grown accustomed to seeing out of him. It was the kind of smile that wouldn't make anyone smile back. Well, most people at least. Ayoka's Aozaki didn't betray the slightest hint of a smile.
それじゃまた。
See you later.
Huh?
And with that friendly farewell, Sojiro walked toward the end of the hallway. Or so she thought before he turned into the next class over. Wait, what did he do? Sojiro headed straight for one of the classroom's windows. Wait, is he gonna jump down? Whereupon he opened it with ease. The chilly November air filled the room as the soft sounds of rain doubled in volume. In that instant, she realized his intention with opening the window. She really wished she hadn't.
いや、待て待て待て！
He already had one leg out of the window when she dashed to stop him.
何するつもりよ、あんたは！
何って、アルバイトに行くんだけど。
その窓は人が出入りするところじゃないの。だいたいここ何階だと思ってるの？
She saw the light of understanding dawn in his eyes.
死ぬところだった。2階から降りたら危なすぎる。
危ないのはあんたの頭。
Her insult went right over his head.
あのね、こっちじゃ窓から人は出入りしないの。さっき言っとくべきだったわ。
知ってるよ。時間がないんで慌ててたんだ。ありがとう。これからは気をつける。
He pulled his leg back inside and closed the window. His school uniform was soaking wet from the rain.
いいけど、私は別に。あなたがどこから外に出ようが関係ないもの。ただ、できれば私の前ではやらないでほしいだけよ。 それより、あなた、本当に明日から学校に来るの？
来るよ。不安だけど案内してもらったし。
He bid her farewell before running away down the hallway. He was literally gonna jump outside the window. She hoped he would walk down the stairs and lead through the school entrance like a normal person.
はあ、大丈夫なのか？あんなんで。
I wonder, okay, if he's really gonna be okay. The image of him disappearing into the distance popped into her head in spite of her ire. She had no intention of spending any more time with him, and yet she felt strangely anxious. She couldn't tell if the feeling was fueled by concern or irritation. Why had she even gotten angry with this insignificant transfer student in the first place? A strange day with a strange transfer student resulting in strange emotions. Her head tilted as she reflected on what should have been a more enjoyable day than the irritating experience she just had.
ま、いっか。どうせこれっきりなんだし。
The sound of the rain echoed quietly all around her. The gray sky seemed frozen in time. It was impossible to discern whether it was morning or evening. Mr. Yamashiro and Ayoko were likely the only ones left at school. The unlit classroom looked overly gloomy and ominous as Ayoko stood in it alone. She pulled her left sleeve. Her dainty, unremarkable watch showed that it was almost 1 o'clock.
時間、合ってる。
She looked out the window at the grounds below. She saw a boy in the uniform running through the rain without an umbrella, a sight she must have seen before but for whatever reason affected her far more than she wished. Okay, I guess we'll take a break here as we've already seen Ayoko and Sojiro here, right? So yeah, this game is I mean, at least very, very mysterious. From the beginning, yeah, it was gruesome, right? Are they telling us that the cat in the beginning was Sojiro? Or just kind of, what do you call it? What is the word for that? I don't know what the word for that is. But yeah, he wanted to jump in the window, right? When a cat jumps, it always lands on its feet, right? So what are they saying there? And yeah, I guess we got some magic as well in the beginning. It was a girl, right? In the beginning who went to her, was a grandfather, right? So, I don't know. I don't know what is that, right? I don't know what we're gonna get from this game or from the story of this. But it looked interesting. I like, I guess, the personalities of them both. Ayoko, I like how she's always angry. Yes, and then Sojiro just calm. Yeah, I like their personalities so far. But I guess we're gonna learn more. So, do we have anything here? Place bookmark. Search for bookmark. Okay, I guess nothing. But yeah, I do apologize for the graphic issues that we're getting here, right? In the video. But I have an AMD 6800 XT card, and for I don't know if it's if it's that specific, but I guess for that AMD card and the driver, I guess the newer drivers, it has a problem with this game for some reason. Because back then, when I guess I tested it, they didn't have any graphical bugs like that. But now, yeah, I guess after upgrading graphic drivers, yeah, it's kind of bugged a little bit, but hopefully it's just, yeah, hopefully it's just that. And when we go to like I guess the bigger scenes and stuff like that, it won't be bugged, right? Let's just hope it's like that. But yeah, hopefully you enjoyed this first episode of Witch and the Holy Night, and I will see you in the next one. So bye bye.